in Italy or democracy in Germany. It is essentially global politics. And within global politics, we see Europe as an interesting part of the world where to experiment transnational political activity. The key passage in the Manifesto is where the authors say the dividing line between progressive and reactionary parties, then it carries, no longer follows the formal line of greater or lesser democracy, of more or less socialism to be instituted. Rather, the division falls along the line, very new and substantial, and this is the division that separates the party members into two groups. And they shorten the quote. One group will go for national power, will try to win national elections, and they will, voluntary or involuntary, play into the hands of reactionary forces. And then he says, letting the incandescent lava of popular passions set in the old molds. The lava will set in the old molds of national politics, thus allowing old absurdities to rise once again. That's one side. The second side are those who see the creation of Europe as the main purpose, and they will direct popular forces towards this goal. And even if they happen to win national power, will use it first and foremost as an instrument for achieving international unity. These are very, very old words, international unity. But this chimes very much, I go back to scene 1, with an article that appeared in the Financial Times in December, so 8 weeks ago, by a columnist who said about today, what has been lost is the sense of mutual interest on which the Union was built. Sharing sovereignty was not so long ago seen as a multiplier of power and influence. Now, the Union is treated as a zero-sum game. As they are forced to surrender power to globalization and the rise in Asia, politicians imagine they can somehow reclaim that power from Brussels. That was Philip Stevens on December the 2nd, which is quite interesting. Okay, so the first bold step is to try to move the cleavage outside national politics. Rossi then criticized his fellow Italian friends who, after the liberation, were trying to establish democracy in Italy. That was the major thing. He said, you're doing something very, very little. You have to be concerned with Europe, not as the second step, but global politics is the first step for domestic political actors. It's not that first we do, the Italian Republic, the Portuguese Republic, and then we look at Europe, but we start from Europe to protect the liberties and establish democracy and rights for all of us. Rossi then in 1955 established with others the Italian Radical Party, which then became today the Transnational Radical Party. It was never an Italian party, it was always a global politics party, so it was very much Rossi's input as well. The cleavage. The second concept is one of essentially, I would say, liberty or freedom, if you prefer, but clearly all the voyage we've seen for Spinelli moving outside communism was towards the idea of giving rights and freedom to individuals. And how can we compensate this with the necessity to have political power in our society? That's, I think, another very important concept, which fits into the other one, which is the attack on the state as known in Europe. So it's not an attack on the US, it's an attack on the state that has become essentially a problem for rights, freedom, and liberties in 1941, when the Manifesto was envisaged. I will say that the other two key concepts are federalism and the notion of war. We talk about this. Start from the last one. With the Manifesto, we see that there is an evaporation of the concept of war as a legitimate tool in international relations. You know that maybe you haven't done it yet with Katia, but Katia will do grotius. There is this idea that even in war, you don't have a rebellis, which means a rebel in Latin, but you have a hostis, which means an enemy. And there is a law war, which this can be still humanly be handled or managed. So wars have their own rules. Obviously, with Hitler, all that had been lost. There is no more, no possibility for states like Italy or France to think of war in that Grotian dimension. However, the attack on the Manifesto is not an attack on war for peace. There is nothing about pacifism in the Manifesto. Neither is war the main political target. I think that the main polemical target is the state, which makes the Manifesto also very post-national or libertarian. We can discuss that later. And in positive, the positive target is liberty rather than peace per se. Let's look at what's wrong with the problem with the state then. Obviously, I said historically it was very clear to these people what the problem was, but essentially when they were preparing the Manifesto, Rossi and Spinelli asked a very old Italian professor of economics, Luigi Einaudi, to suggest something to read. Einaudi had written in the 20-some pages about European federalism and suggested, why don't you read this person, Lionel Robbins. And they knew Lionel Robbins, I remember the pronunciation, Robbins, because he was an English political economist, but also a federalist. And it's very interesting in terms of history of ideas, how these Italians, well, first they read English, French, German, etc., but they were also capable in jail to get to read English political economy, and they came across, therefore, the early school of English federalism that was buoyant in the late 30s and in 1940, 1941. So essentially, from Lionel Robbins, they got the idea that the nation-state in Europe had become illiberal and responsible for the pre-Leviathan state of Europe. And the Manifesto argues that if you go back to John Locke, Montesquieu, Stuart Mill, Verri, Cattaneo, those are Italian founding fathers, they all stress the